Hello, my name is Jacob Lunn, and welcome to my little video essay, or video log rather, of the work I have done on our boss fight at the end of the game. We had a lot of work, a lot of trial and error, a lot of different things we had to do and change to make the boss viable and work as a gameplay factor and make it very enjoyable to fight against. And there was a lot of passing around back and forth that we had to do between team members to make sure it worked, and I was the guy mainly responsible for that. And I'd like to talk to you about the things I worked on and exactly how I got the boss to be how it is today, with the great help of David. Absolutely, David has been an amazing asset to the team, and I really, really appreciate all the work he's done. Um, so our first idea for the boss was to make him just be the last enemy of the game, at least of this part of the game, and make it so he's a viable enemy to fight. And fit towards a level and maybe give some world building towards the NPC that we have that David implemented, the NPC that's trapped, and that's stuck, and he wants the hood guy to maybe free him or free everyone that is trapped in this dungeon by these horrible goblin creatures. They're very discriminatory or just not nice people. And David did get to work on making a boss to begin with, which was really, really, really good. He made the AI, which is incredible. I could never do such a thing. I'm really, really impressed with what he did. But what I did is just polish it up, add that art to it, and then change the attacks at all. I do have a recording of the previous boss. What I did is take the goblin model, scale it up. I modeled a crown to signify he's like the goblin king or the goblin boss, making sure he's distinct from the other one, all the other goblins. Added a socket to his head so it actually follows his head during the idle animation. Made sure his animation blend space actually exists as well. So it's an entirely different one for the regular goblins, so he actually has different attacks you can do. Such as there, here's a different animation blueprint. Boss BP, if we open that. Here we are. Here's a different animation blueprint. That's really interesting stuff here. But this uses the blend space so he can like run an attack. But my job was actually getting him into a sort of refined state. We have a video here of the old boss, and it worked. It was functional. What's happening here is that he has these warnings on the ground to show you where the boss is going to attack. And then if you're in those warnings, by the time that he attacks, he will do damage to you or take off health from the player somehow. There was no animations at this stage. I hadn't even made them yet. There was the projectile, so we used that as an attack that we could test against with the old range, with the attack indicators. And it worked at a baseline. It used some really, really simple trigger boxes on the melee attacks. So again, if you're inside these trigger boxes, you just get hurt. Same way with the short one, and that's all what it was. The core code that David wrote functioned perfectly fine. Everything was great. We just needed to add that artistic flair and get it so it had visual cues for the players, because they don't really know what's happening here, other than maybe the projectile fire one. But there's no actual signal that he's going to do that. Maybe no audio cues. Maybe there's voice acting. Maybe you can hear which attack he's about to do, depending on what type of voice acting the Goblin King is doing, and that was my job as well. So I first noticed that along with the regular enemy, the regular enemy's arms are too stubby to hold really any sort of regular weapons, so you kind of have to make them obscenely long. For the sword, I fixed that by scaling its length during its attack, so it becomes much larger at the peak of this float track during the peak of that swipe. So it's much easier to get hit by it when it attacks. The boss is a little bit difficult. So instead, I remodeled a brand new weapon for him, this hammer. I felt it signified his sort of character, making him a very brute strength character. So he can slam this into the ground, he can swing it about, swing its weight about. That's kind of that's kind of how he is as a person, and I think it emphasizes that character design well. Even if he's just a regular goblin, his greater size and probably greater strength will be emphasized and embodied by the weapon existing. And once I did that, it's allowed me to change its size and scale to make it sort of fit him as a character, and also allow him to have a range of attacks, very multitude different different range of attacks that he can do that work with his character, make sense, and also engaging to fight and hard to avoid. We want him to have range. If he's too easy to fight, it's going to be, boring. It's not going to be engaged with the player. They could just outrun him or something. We need to have him different kinds of ranged attacks, close attacks, scary amounts of damage, and for it to make sense that he's doing that damage too. If he's doing a lot of damage, but he seems like he just lightly tapped you or flicked you, it either is really impactful or not enough, and we need to make sure we show that in the animations that I made. So I did make a bunch of different animations, such as a hammer swing. Don't mind this. The crown isn't correctly scaled in Blender. That's my mistake, and there's no placeholder, item for the hammer. But what I did is add the signal cues for a ribbon trail using a Niagara effect, similar to the weapon trail, and just made it red for the swing attack. So he swings, his hammer's forward, and around and like a swooping effect. And normally he just stood still for this. But I felt that was too simple. So what I did instead is make it so whenever the boss does that swing attack, which should be this one, he launches forward this many units. 1,000 units. So, whenever he does this attack, he launches forward, which makes it much harder to avoid that attack. And there's no actual warning for it either, but you should get used to it. There's, you'll figure out the attack the first time it happens, and it'll happen a lot more because there's only about 3 attacks he can cycle through, thanks to David's pretty good code. I'm really, really happy with it. So that's one way I did one attack, and that utilizes his hammer, and he's swinging it around, he's swinging the wraiths around, and like the idea is as the weight of the hammer comes forward, it throws him forward too, so he'll be moving along with the end of the hammer that goes like that, and the trail signifies that, so it shows how just forceful it is. And to emphasize that further, I found some sound effects on Pixabay. I mixed them up in Pro Tools and a software I use called Shortcut, and added them when he actually does a spin attack on a custom event. I believe spin attack sound effect, which is just here, just plays the sound in a location, so it's in 3D. It takes the location of itself, so it's always going to play the sounds on the boss. That way it adds a visual and an audio cue of when it's about to happen. Furthermore, I did some voice acting to for the boss, and I made it so the hammer swinger sound, this is the voice acting, the boss voices attack, and I made an audio cue. I don't know if I can find that here. I can't be finding it now. That's okay. But yes, there's only a couple voice acting sound bites that he will play specifically for the swing attack to give the player further cue of what attack he's going to actually throw out before he does it, to give you time to prepare. I think that makes it fair and kind of enjoyable to play, because you've got to be listening and paying attention. It keeps you focused on the game whilst not making it unbearably easy. So that is one way where I fixed one of the attacks. These are all attacks that used to exist on the previous boss. I just changed the animations and added the animations that I made in Blender. Changed the weapon, because he didn't previously have a weapon. He just sort of had those hitboxes like in the clip. He still has 3 attacks here. I just changed animations, changed the hitboxes. So now instead of very large hitboxes that extend out, he has this hitbox here on the hammer. What this does is while he's swinging it, and also this one here mainly, because if you want to get hit, if he's swinging that hammer around and you're closer to him, so you're between the hammerhead and him, it would be weird if he didn't get hit. So what I did is I made the hitbox extend the entire length of the hammer, so he does this full swoop attack around him, and there's no way if you're too close, you're going to get hit anyways. And I made it so if we go to the code on the event graph, whilst he's doing the animation, so on notify begin, it will then open this gate, and if you collide with it, if BP Hood Guy, which is the character we play, collides with it, it will then launch the, doing damage node, or this old logic here, it will do damage. If it collides outside of the gate being closed, of course when the animation stops, it will close the gate, nothing will happen. So you can only do damage whilst the gate is open, and that's only during the montage that is being played. So that makes it fair and even, so you can't just run into the hammer while he's holding it and get damaged by that too. I also added some other visual feedback if you do get hit, such as hit stop, which is its own function, which I'm very, very proud of. It just stops the time dilation for a brief moment for about, 200 milliseconds, and then starts it again after a short delay, which adds more impact. Yeah, so there's the delay duration 0.2. It adds more impact and shows how heavy that attack is and how, it hurt getting hit by that. None of the other enemies have hit stop, so it adds that further impactfulness and like, oh god, this guy means business. That's another visual thing that I added there. Very simple to add. And also, instead of as well as hit stop, I added screen shake. So he hit you with this massive hefty hammer that's so unbelievably large, it has caused your entire screen to shake. It just shows the heft and the weight of it and how much stronger this Goblin King is compared to the rest of them. Really setting the pace and really setting the sort of scene of how, who you're sort of dealing with, which I think also emphasizes the fight. And if you get hit by him and you see all that happen, you're not going to want to get hit again. And it makes it quite tense, I feel. So these are some other game design functions, game design premises I've added to this boss fight. So that's just for this one attack. Repulse the damage event, and then it does boss as player, which is just the VFX. It changes, the hurt widget, so when the player can heal, it does a damage number. But yeah. So, with the ranged attack, I wanted it to be different, because on the video, he just launches a spike of 3 projectiles like that, It's kind of lazy. It didn't really work very well because the projectiles are too far off the ground. So on this camera angle, if you thought you were just about, if you're standing here, the projectile could have been a little bit closer to you and actually hit you because of their grace period on their actual collision box. So it was actually feeling a little unfair. And he was just sort of standing there. So I wanted to make the attack more dangerous, more clear, and more akin to his style. Why is he throwing 3 rocks? He's heavy, he's big, he could be doing so much more than that. So I thought, what if instead of just throwing 3 rocks, which also was going to be, I don't want to reuse the same attack, why not instead I make him slam his hammer down into the ground, and then maybe a projectile spawns off that. And what could that do? Maybe like maybe the rubble of him hitting the ground spawns rocks? No. What I thought instead is that you could have him hit the ground with his hammer, and then a gush of air, like a shock wave from how hard the impact was, hits the ground, gushes out, and launches towards the player. And that's what I designed for this, and it actually works pretty much exactly how I expected it to. You just spawn a projectile on the same arrow as the rest of them, just the forward one, or even spawn it on him. I believe I do that instead, so it's a little bit fairer, so it's not just emitting straight from the hammerhead. So what I did on these here, I got a notify queue for the actual hammer trail. So there's actually a trail that shows that how fast it's moving and how impactful it's going to be. Then I had another notify called slam, which when that notify happens, it will then trigger to spawn the projectile here. So on notify begin, slam, sequence, first one, it does the slam effect. So there's a Niagara effect actually spawned, and I made just for this. And also in the slam effect, instead of just activating and deactivating this Niagara effect, we also activate screen shake regardless of whether or not you're hit, because this hammer is slamming into the ground. That's going to be so impactful on its own, you don't need to get hit for that. So we add screen shake anyways, but no hit stop because you didn't get hit by it. And this NS slam effect, I'm actually just going to pause up here for a second if you don't mind. Where is NS slam? Here it is. This Niagara effect is quite complicated. So this effect basically uses a bunch of different shockwaves and pans across a material that I made called energy smoke. I made 2 different ones because I was bug testing and trying to figure things out. But it spawns these 2 meshes, which are just these smokes that pan across the material that I made. I then also get an energy burst, which is just a regular energy burst, and then I modify it slightly to have this sort of shockwave effect around it, this line here. At the very end as well, I add a bunch of rocks that spawn the same model that's from the actual goblin projectile, but it's so small you won't be able to tell. It just has that extra effect of you're hitting the ground so hard, it's kicking up rubble, and it's just showing how the effective is. That's what happens when he hits, and I actually use a similar effect like this when he does his stomp attack, which I'll get into in a little bit. But he hits the ground with this, and then spawns this projectile, and then to enforce that fact, this is where this hitbox comes into play. I kind of mistaked earlier. If he hits you with just the hammerhead, to make it a bit more fair, because I don't want it to be... He's swinging it down. If you get hit by the handle, it's a little bit weird. It will do the same logic that I did before, as long as the gate is open during the notify. It will allow an attack to go through, which is right here. Do this damage. And it'll also set a boolean, so if it hits you with the hammer, it won't do damage from the projectile. I felt that was fair enough, because you don't want about 100 health being depleted, because the hammer does about, what, 35 damage, the projectile does about 15 to 20 damage. I don't want, say, someone to have 75 health to then completely lose everything just because they got hit by one attack too close. So they get hit by the hammer, they don't get hit by the projectile. If they don't get hit by the hammer and they avoid it, it then launches the projectile anyways and sends that forward. And then this will do its own damage, which is in this blueprint here, which is just slightly different to the regular blueprint. I just changed the sprites that Morgan made. Thank God Morgan. Yes, we spawned Morgan's projectile here using just a regular plane of the material that Morgan made for me. He just made an amazing texture, which I then put into a material instance here. It's amazing. I'm really, really happy with it. Thank God Morgan. And then that'll launch forward, and if it does damage, yippee. If it doesn't, even better, because then the player gets to stay alive. So that's the way I've revamped this ranged attack. So it's still a ranged attack, it just has an extra close range effect to it if you are too cocky and you get too close, which makes it more dangerous and can do more damage. It also has this pretty kick-ass visual effect if it hits the ground, and also it will do a slight hit stop if it hits you with the hammer. So it's, visually you can tell that you got hit by the hammer, because it'll be a different sound cue and be a different hit stop rather than just having the hammer hit the ground and then it hit you with the projectile instead. And then for the melee attack, which is this close one in a second, I think it is. That one. I wanted that to be a very, very sort of close range melee attack that'll do high amounts of damage. It'd be really dangerous. But I also don't want to make it, because I don't know how to play with David's AI code. I like to leave that to him. That's his job. That's not my responsibility. So I want to not touch that as much as possible. I want to leave that alone and do as little to it as possible. So he stands still quite a long time. I felt I could work with this and instead make an attack that is very clearly broadcast to the player using the animation. And then when he hits the ground, when he maybe, does some melee attack or close range, I don't want it to just be a regular swipe. He's already done a swipe attack. He's already done hitting the ground with his hammer. What other attack can I do? I want it to be really impactful, then also make it so you still have to dodge something if you're far away. Because if you're just standing there waiting for him to finish his attack, it's kind of boring, isn't it? That's what I thought, at least, after trying and testing this boss over and over again. So what I thought of instead is for him, instead of just doing this regular hitbox, I make him do a stomp attack, which I don't know if I actually got the animation blueprint here for, so if you don't give me a second. So he reaches out, it's very clearly broadcasted, he slams his foot on the ground, he's leaning back, he puts his arms out, he'll do a sound effect, and then he does an extra stomp. Yeah, so, no extra VFX for this, other than the effect called stomp, which I made over here. NS stomp effect. Here it is. So this is very similar to the slime effect. Doesn't have the exact same effects as the slime effect, but is similar enough to where, you can tell there's a puff of smoke and he's really used his foot and he's quite heavy with it. So it shows his force and shows how strong he really is. And it's kind of scary in that fact. So when he stomps the ground, that effect plays. And also a sound effect will play of like some rubble falling, these rocks falling, of showing he's crunching the ground with his foot. And then what I did, instead of it just being the stomp attack, because we do have a stomp attack indicator, should be, I don't know, one of these here, range warning, bunch of those. Instead of that, what I did is put these arrows here, and then when he stomps the ground, that idea of his ranged attack is kind of like kicking up stones. What I use that and I repurpose that for this attack to make it so it's not that bland. When he stomps the ground, it will then go through, I believe, stomp attack, spawn rocks, custom event here. So when he stomps the ground, it will go through an array of all these projectile spawns I showed you with these arrows here, and then spawn a rock projectile on each one of those on this array. Get children components and projectile spawns, and then it'll spawn on this for every single one of them, on this for each loop. It is also, by the way, uses the same logic as before with the slam. If the slam hits you first, the projectiles don't hit you. If the stomp hits you first, the projectiles don't hit you. To keep it more fair, you only get hit by one tank at once. We want to reduce the difficulty because we want to make sure the game scope, or at least the game's accessibility, is for everyone. We want to make sure as much people as possible can play it at even a standing, a starting level. We want to make sure it's easy as possible to pick up this game. So we don't want to make it super punishing. So it spawns these projectiles, and it gets also the rotation and location of each arrow. So they'll already be pointing in the direction of each arrow anyway, so I'm more than fine with that. And then I also add all these different ranged indicators to show exactly where they're going to be shooting out of. Because if you've never really seen this attack before, it's going to be really hard to know he's even going to kick up stones. So I made these subtle sort of ranged indicators that show you there's probably going to be something in that direction, just watch out. And it gives clear indication to the player that you probably want to sit between them and where you might get hit. I felt that this has been a really valid revamp of the boss, and in my experience, it made playing the boss or fighting it really, really fun. And from everyone that I saw in the feedback that I got on the presentation day I did on the 20th of May, it was extremely well received, and I'm really, really, really happy with it. I'm going to now get to the boss, and I want to show you exactly what I mean. So here is the boss in question after the revamps that I have made, all the changes I've made to make him more artistic, pleasing. There's a slam attack. If he hits you, you've got that sound effect, the metal clink sound. That's to clearly indicate that you got hit by the hammer. He also has this voice effect. You'll hear him. He laughs for his stomp. You got the clear indication of where the rocks are going to be. Also, David added this functionality where he spawns minions to make it so you're not just paying attention to the boss. You've got other things to worry about. It's more dangerous. It's more things going on. It makes it more visually, engaging. It makes it really interesting. So he spawns all these projectiles out in all different directions. They're all spinning. And if he hits you with just the stomp, the projectiles don't hit you. But that doesn't count for the minion stuff. So he'll chase you. This is a spin attack. You don't know what's going to happen. He lunges forward using the weight of the hammer. And it'll hit you, and it'll do that hit stop. I don't know if you can tell that. There's no hit stop there because he's not moving. If you pay attention here. It's a hit stop and that screen shake when he hits you, showing the heft of that, the weight of that hammer hitting you. There's a stop attack, you'll avoid the rocks. Game design wise, he's going to do a race attack. That gust of wind, you've got to dash out of the way. There is a dash mechanic we want in this game, and we want to make sure it's meaningful to use. Make sure it's actually worthwhile using. If you could just walk away from everything, there's no point in having to dash at all. So I made it so that attack is actually quite difficult to avoid if you don't use the dash. Still possible if you're being careful, but it's incentivized to use the dash. And I think compared to the previous boss fight that I showed you, I think this is an incredibly valid revamp of this boss fight, and I'm really proud of the work that I did. This is working halfway through the boss and seeing how he used to have that rock attack still. There's various different stages that he went through. And also, at the end, at the death of each enemy, they do this poof sound effect where I go, and this poof of smoke comes up. That's its own Niagara effect that I made very simply, using a copy of the Niagara effect for each torch. Changing the color to white, making it bigger, making it expand from one location rather than rise up like negative gravity. And then just have it spawn on every enemy death. It's very simple to do. So as you can see, when we kill the goblins, they poof, and that poof of smoke comes up. And I think that's a more playful version of death that we could depict in this game, because it's fantasy-like, it's not realistic. We want to make sure it's appealable to kids and children of families. We don't want gruesome death or blood and gore in this game, so I think this is the best way we could approach slaying or vanquishing any enemies or foe, because this character, this hood guy, he doesn't want to be here, he doesn't want to hurt anyone. He's just having to defend himself because these goblins don't take too kindly to him. And that's just what he has to do, so we don't want to make it any more gruesome than it has to be. And that's, I think, the best choice we could have gone with that. So yes, that was the work that I've done on the boss fight for this game. I really hope you enjoyed seeing that insight, or maybe this behind the scenes, and appreciate the work that I've done. I must give immense thanks to David, my team member, and also Morgan, which helped me produce this work. David wrote all the AI for the boss, which I cannot give any other credit to other than his own. He's done amazing work, and I'm really, really, really happy with his result. And Morgan's projectile sprite, I'm really happy with as well. I couldn't have done it without him. There was no other way I could find it. I'm not very good with 2D art. And all the other art that he found in the game as well, I'm really happy with as well. So massive thanks to them. But yeah, that's my artistic revamp on the boss, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching.